two, one.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 106th episode of the Atlas Society Asks. My name is Jennifer Grossman. My friends call me Jag. I'm the CEO of the Atlas Society. We are the leading nonprofit organization introducing young people to the ideas of Ayn Rand in fun, creative ways like our graphic novels and animated videos. Today, we are joined by Spencer Jakab. And before I even get into introducing our guest, I want to remind all of you who are watching us on Zoom, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, use the comment sections to type in your questions, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. So our guest, Spencer Jakab, is an award-winning financial journalist and the editor of Heard on the Street, the Wall Street Journal's financial and economic analysis column. Mr. Jakab is also the author of two books, including his second one, The Revolution That Wasn't, GameStop, Reddit, and The Fleecing of Small Investors, which explains the riveting story behind the January 2021 GameStop meme stock event that rocked some of the biggest players in the investment world. So, Spencer, thank you again for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So first, our audience always is interested in origin stories. So perhaps you have a rather unique one. You'll share a bit about your story. Your parents, if I understand, emigrated from Hungary as refugees 65 years ago with next to nothing. You grew up bilingual, and for the first chapter of your career, you helped American companies get a foothold in formerly Soviet bloc states. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that story and perhaps how your parents' experience may have influenced your perspective today.
Sure. Well, my dad was a 56 refugee, and in 1956, there was a revolution in Hungary, and about 2% of the country walked across the border, 180,000 people, and he was one of them. And of those, about 80,000 came to the United States, and the rest went to other countries, to Sweden, Australia, Switzerland, Germany, what have you. And my mom actually is a bit different category. She came 10 years later. So my dad, Hungary kind of wised up and decided to let people who weren't, really dangerous and oppositional to come back and spend their hard currency there. And he came back to get his father out and his brother, or we expected to smuggled his brother out basically, but he got his father out legally 10 years later. And his father and my mom's mother lived in the same building. And they introduced their children. My mom was 10 years younger, and he was there for many, many weeks trying to get his dad out, and they met there. And so my mom left in 1966, and I was born a few years later, and my sister was born a year after me. So yeah, it definitely influenced me, being the child of emigres. It has a big influence because it's the kind of the economic anxiety that they live through, but also having grown up in a communist country. And I would say that, they experienced it in different ways. So my mom was born during World War II. My dad had some experience of life. I mean, a very, very poor life, but a life before communism. And so people of his generation, I think, had a sort of a knowledge of the before, and my mom really did not. Her whole experience as a child and a teenager and a young person was in a communist society. And so she's a bit different than those people. And that made me a bit different too, because a lot of the people who grew up bilingual when the Iron Curtain fell during my college years, towards the end of my college years, who said, hey, I grew up bilingual, and not everybody did. Maybe I can move back and use my skills and help a company and apply myself. Were all 10 years older than me in the case of people who moved to Hungary because of, their parents were in their 20s in the 1950s. My mom was in her 20s in the 1960s. And so I was really the right age. I had nothing to lose. I had no career to speak of. And so a lot of the people I think who went to Hungary, I think were already sort of, maybe they were failing at their careers or not particularly successful at their careers. Because if you were really, really successful, you were going to pick up and move to this poor East European country. Whereas for me, it was, it was just so exciting. And there was, I really had nothing. I was doing my master's at Columbia University, and I met a kid who had been an investment banker. I had no idea about finance. My parents obviously didn't know anybody on Wall Street. And this kid said, yeah, he had been an investment banker. He's a 56-year-old kid now. We're still friends. And he told me what investment banking was because I was curious. And he said, yeah, you're totally bilingual. They're going to privatize everything in Central and Eastern Europe. You should go get a job there being completely bilingual. Just take all the finance coursework you can at Columbia Business School while you're here, which I did. I liked it a lot. And so I made that career switch. And I worked in finance for the first 10 years of my career before becoming a financial journalist, which I've done for the last 19. Long answer to your question.
Spectacular. No, very interesting about your dad. Obviously, Ayn Rand, much earlier, was one of the first refugees from the Soviet Union itself. So I bet they would have had some interesting stories to
I'm
share.
sure, yeah.
So continuing down the family tree, the opening line, the opening sentence of your book is arresting, to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
You write, "I'll never forget the day I found out that my sons were degenerates." Explain what you meant by that and how the revelation actually led to your decision to write the book.
Yeah, well, my sons are very nice boys, and they're not doing anything naughty. But yeah, I always want to get people's attention with that book. So degenerates are what people on a particular subreddit that was very influential, that's very central to my story, call themselves. They call themselves other things that I really can't repeat in a PG-rated podcast, but degenerates are one of the things that they call one another. And the subreddit, it's on Reddit. It's a forum on Reddit called Wall Street Bets. It went from having, let's say, the beginning of my story, slightly over 1 million people on it, which is a lot for a subreddit, but by no means the most. It made it maybe the 200th most important subreddit, to having 2 million right at the beginning of the story as things started to heat up, to having 11 million as the story matured. So it exploded in size. And I have 3 sons, one who's now 23. He was a college senior at the time of the events, and one who just turned 16 today. And he was a high school freshman at the beginning of the events. And they're both very active on Reddit, and they were on this forum. And as my oldest son, who was home because of COVID from college, his senior year, and walked over to me, I was at home too, and he said, "Dad, are you going to write something about GameStop?" And GameStop at this time is a failing mall-based video game retailer that I had driven all my sons to at various times over the years, like a lot. We were there a lot. We had not been there in a few years, not just because of the pandemic, was because physical media were going out of fashion in video games. It still exists, but games have become digitized. So it was kind of like Blockbuster Video a few years before streaming completely took over. There was really no reason to get the discs or even have them mailed to you. And it was at that stage, it had been losing money for years, that GameStop was. And I took a look at it and I saw that it had doubled. The stock had doubled in the last couple of days. And the reason that it had doubled is that they were talking about it on Wall Street Bets. Wall Street Bets I was aware of it, because I'm at the Wall Street Journal and I'm a markets person. I edit this markets column, and I had seen that stocks that were mentioned there would go up a lot and they go down a lot. And so it would just be like a flash in the pan. And he mentioned it because a friend of his had bought the stock. And I don't want to, kind of give advice to anybody, specific financial advice. I'll give general financial advice. But I said, listen, your friend, and I've known this kid since he was, up fairly above my knee. I think he should sell because this is a flash in the pan. And he said, no, he's not going to sell. That's the idea, is they can't sell. And so that caught my attention. And so that's the crux of this story. And it took me probably 10 minutes to see that something crazy was going on from a financial point of view. which is that the people on this forum were attempting to do something that had not been successfully done for about a century, which was to kind of put in a corner on a stock. And corners happen sometimes in commodity markets. Very, very difficult to do in the stock market since the SEC has existed, because a corner is basically where, just to explain for people who might not be familiar, there are some people who bet against the stock, and most people will bet that a stock will rise, who own it. And when you bet against the stock, what you do is you open yourself up to theoretically unlimited losses. You borrow the stock without owning it, you sell it, and then you hope to buy it back at a lower price. But of course, the difference between the price where you sold it and the price where you buy it back, the most you're going to make is 100%. But your losses are theoretically unlimited. You can lose infinity% if a stock keeps on going up. And so then you have to buy it back. And sometimes there are short squeezes, which happen all the time, which is that people have sold a stock short, and then there's like a kind of stampede to reverse the trade, and to kind of cover their losses or stanch the bleeding, they'll buy it back, and it's kind of a stampede. But what this was a deliberate attempt to do that, which is not legal to do. Like you and I couldn't both have hedge funds and gang up on a third hedge fund that we knew was selling a stock short and squeeze them that way. But what was happening here was that this was being discussed openly, had been discussed for weeks in a forum that nobody on Wall Street had bothered to look at, but had over 2 million members that day. And there were some sophisticated people who used pseudonyms on that board who explained to them how to do it with the maximum effectiveness to get the most bang for the buck, which is to generate, and I explain it in the book, it sounds wonky, but I do explain it, something called a gamma squeeze. And they caused this stock from trough to peak to go up 1,000-fold. And it became the most traded security in the world. It pulled up a whole bunch of other stocks with it. And that is an incredible story by itself. And I had a half-written book proposal about something else that I was going to, at some point, send to Penguin Random House and publish my first book. And I just sent an email to the acquisitions editor, who I didn't really know. And I said, this incredible thing is happening. You should be aware of it. I'd love to write a book about it. And she said, that's great. She wrote right back, which is amazing too. And she said, do you have a proposal? I haven't heard about that. I said, no, this is happening now. Like, you're going to start reading about this in a few hours. And that week, there were over 1,000 articles in the English language alone about this phenomenon. It was the biggest thing. Every late night talk show host was talking about it. President Biden was asked about it, who had just been inaugurated. It was a big story for the next 6 or 7 days. It was one of the most, I think it was the most searched Google term that week too, in many countries. And so GameStop was a big phenomenon. And that's what I thought a book would be about. And they immediately said, yes, we want you to write about this. But within a few days, it got even crazier, because what happened, as I tell the story in my book, is that all these people were creating a lot of pressure on these hedge funds. And all of a sudden, the main broker that was the broker to all these mainly young male investors who were doing this no longer allowed them to keep buying the stock or to buy options on the stock, which is what was pushing it up. And so it was seen as this stab in the back, and it was seen as a sign of collusion by insiders on Wall Street. And it still, to this day, has spawned lots and lots of conspiracies. It spurred congressional hearings. Politicians on the left and the right were united in condemning it, and they were wrong. That's not what happened. And as I explain in my book, there wasn't a conspiracy. And actually, what happened is that all these financial firms that had really gotten rich off of a phenomenon that was going back a year, going back to just before the beginning of the pandemic, had drawn all these young traders in, had done too good of a job and gotten them too excited. And this was the kind of the apex of the mania. And they almost fried the financial system. And so that's what the book explains. It explains how we got there. And it goes back to 2019, explains how cheap money and free commissions and and fiscal stimulus and all these other things all played a role in creating this story. And people, a lot of people are angry at me for writing this, because they want the romantic narrative that these guys gave Wall Street a black eye, and then the plug was pulled, and they were stabbed in the back. And that's just not true. But the story is incredible anyway, and very interesting and very instructive about what's going on in our economy and in finance.
You must have had to write the book pretty quickly.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I told them that, listen, the book should come out on the anniversary of the events, because there'll be, and I thought at the time that it was going to be this flash in the pan and that a year later, there would be all these reminiscences about how crazy it was. And that's what we agreed. And that's what the contract said. And so I basically spent every waking hour that I wasn't editing at the Wall Street Journal. I'd literally fall asleep at my keyboard every night, working on this every weekend, used all my vacation time. And I had a manuscript done by the summer of 2021. So basically 7 months later, there was a completed manuscript, and the book did come out, although unfortunately supply chain problems then delayed it by a week, which was really aggravating. But yeah, so I wrote it very quickly for a book. Books don't usually happen that quickly. But it turns out that it has remained a story and remained interesting because it didn't die down. Like all these conspiracy theories that stemmed from trading being halted have continued to this day, and it morphed into other weird things. And so these meme stocks have had a second and third and fourth and fifth life since the story happened.
So it's just to place some context on this and get some of the background and the players, but a lot of the headlines, a lot of the frothy coverage was about this is a watershed moment, and the power is being placed back in the hands of ordinary investors, and they're sticking it to Wall Street. But you say, actually, that's not what happened at all. So
yeah, unfortunately, it isn't. I mean, it's a worthy story for sure, and it's a crazy story. And I think the story, and I try to tell the story. I think I do tell the story in a way that even though you kind of know how it ends, it does build suspense, and you get very interested in the characters. So it's a combination of an kind of a narrative TikTok type story, and then also along the way explaining all the things that were going on in the history of those things, of short selling, and what is a gamma squeeze, how did all this happen, what's the impact of free money, how did social media play into it, how did these gamified trading apps play into it. Yeah, but it was not a revolution in that sense. I mean, these people thought that they were getting a twofer, and they got a zerofer. They thought that they were going to get rich, and they thought that they were mortally wounding Wall Street and turning the tables. And the thing is that, Wall Street, I hate to be a party pooper, but Wall Street is a big place. So there were some people who lost a lot of money on Wall Street. There's a hedge fund that just recently closed down now,
Melvin Capital,
subsequent to the publication of my book, that lost its investors $7 billion in the course of a few days. And there are other hedge funds that lost billions of dollars. But, hedge funds are not Wall Street. And there are a lot of hedge funds that were much quieter about it that made a lot of money. So hedge funds as a group made more money than they lost. Investment banks made a ton of money off of this whole phenomenon. And the middlemen on Wall Street made lots and lots of money on this phenomenon. They did not lose, although one of them almost went out of business, which I do explain how that happened, and almost took down some other firms with it, which is a story that's not talked about at all. But Wall Street writ large really likes when this happens. It really likes it when people get excited and think that they can beat Wall Street. And if you look at and then people will write back to me and say, you're lying, there's a conspiracy, oh, and I made a lot of money. Well, I'm not lying, it's not a conspiracy, and maybe you made a lot of money. I can't look at everyone's brokerage statement and verify that. But there are people who made a lot of money during the dot-com boom. There are people who made a lot of money during every mania and panic and crash in history, and walked away with more money than they started with. Some of them are deluding themselves, and some of them are telling fibs. But of course, there's some people who make money in any crazy financial episode. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that as a group, these people did not figure out a way to beat Wall Street. And at the time, there are people who were romanticizing it. Alexis Ohanian, who's the co-founder of Reddit, the social network, plays a pretty big role in this, said, these people should start a hedge fund. They should get together and crowdsource a hedge fund. This is like, mom and pop sticking it to the man, which is completely naive. That's not at all. You can't do that. You shouldn't try to do that. Hedge funds are hedge funds for a reason. They have very good computers and very smart people. Of course, they don't all do well or make money either, but a crowdsourced hedge fund is a terrible idea and a great way to burn up individuals' money. And a lot of these people regretted ever getting into this. And even if they lost small amounts of money and said, that's fine, I don't care that I lost money, okay, good. But there are much better ways to spend your money than trying to blow up Wall Street, which you didn't do.
So I want to get to maybe the motivation, because at the Atlas Society, we focus on philosophy, we focus on values, and we also focus on vices. And one of those is envy, which Ayn Rand describes as the hatred of the good for being good. It's not just wanting what other people have. It's not just wanting to succeed, but it's wanting others to fail. So I'd love to get into that, but I want to remind all of you who are watching us on various platforms. I learned so much in reading this book and still learning. So if you have some questions or want to find out more about what happened with GameStop and also what's continuing to happen with AMC and all of these other, meme stocks going around, please type in your questions and we will get to as many of them as we can. So getting to that motivation, it almost seems like the ethos in some corners of Wall Street bets was similar or echoing that of Occupy Wall Street. And, where did that come from?
Yeah, first of all, you mentioned envy. I think envy, I agree, is just a waste of energy. Of all the vices, that's the dumbest one, right? What do you? It's just negative energy. But yeah, I don't think it was just envy, but I think it was resentment. I think you have to look. The people who were involved in this, and I met people who are, I'll be 53 this year. I met people who were my age. I couldn't believe how many people I met. Like when I just was sort of casually mentioned, oh yeah, I'm working on this book. Go, oh really? Oh, I was involved in that. But it primarily was, I would say 80% male, as far as I can tell in my unscientific survey, between the ages of 18 and 35. And this is a group that was not invested in the markets, did not own a home when the great financial crisis hit, but it's a formative experience for them. And so it's not a group that resents wealth necessarily. It's a group that resents Wall Street specifically. So like if you look at Elon Musk, he's a real hero to a lot of these people. Or you look at someone like Chamath Palihapitiya, who I mentioned a lot in my book, who's the SPAC king, special, this kind of blank check company king. He kind of ingratiated himself to this group and was viewed pretty favorably. And other people. So Silicon Valley wealth is not hated, but Wall Street wealth is. And so it's almost like this caricature, and then hedge fund managers are the real cartoon villains of Wall Street, right? Like they're the people who you really, really hate. And that group specifically was vilified by the Wall Street bets crowd. And so, yeah, I think that Occupy Wall Street, which is to me is just such a kind of an incoherent movement, but a lot of that ethos came through where there was resentment at people losing their homes or losing their savings. And of course, there was wrongdoing on Wall Street, but nobody, not that many crimes. And I think a lot of the crimes that were committed on a lower level. It was sort of a heads I win, tails you lose thing, and that's always the case on Wall Street, right? That's a real problem with Wall Street, is that incentives are misaligned. So whether it was people at big banks or hedge funds or wherever during the financial crisis, they profited, but they weren't forced to give back much of that wealth. If you're at a hedge fund and you have 5 really good years and you're making 20% of fees on the profits you make, and then you wipe out in the 6th year, you don't have to give that back. And so the way that the incentives are structured is not very smart. But people know that going into it. And then people don't read the fine print. And so it's, I mean, I think there are people who are duped and in all kinds of financial products and didn't understand what they were signing up for. And then there are people who were simply didn't bother to read the fine print because they were very greedy and they wanted to get rich, whether it was to kind of sign a liar loan that they know they shouldn't have qualified for, or to invest in a product that seemed fishy, but they thought that they could make lots and lots of money. So I think the blame is evenly spread, and that includes recent crypto blowups where people are, they were making 20% a year. Like, why do you think you were making 20% a year? I really, for a long time, and I started out talking about my parents who were both immigrants. I saw a lot of their contemporaries get sucked into these schemes, which is just so heartbreaking. Where I just, and that's where I got interested in this sort of this gullibility and this sort of problems with incentives in the financial system. I remember when I was still working on Wall Street, I was a director or managing director, I guess I was a director at that point in the equities department of investment bank. I was, one of the youngest directors ever at that bank. There was a stock boom going on. I remember holding my oldest son, who was a baby at the time. So it was like, we're talking 23 years ago, right at just before the peak of the dot-com bubble. And my mom's friends, who would all come here penniless, who'd all scrimped and saved, worked very hard, sacrificed everything to have a nest egg, were all at or near retirement at the time, telling me how, first asking me about a bunch of dot-com stocks. And when I was telling them that they shouldn't be investing in it, it's not appropriate for their age and their risk tolerance, whatever. And then they cut me off and they're telling me how smart they were and how many times their money they'd made in Lucent or whatever. And it's just, when people kind of get bitten by that bug, I'm telling them I'm the only person that they knew on Wall Street. I definitely had kind of the credentials, to be able to tell them, and no incentive to steer them away from it. I had nothing to gain telling them not to do it. And friends of my mother-in-law's who'd grown up in this country, lost everything. She had friends who lost their homes after the financial crisis because they made unwise gambles on these things, and they wouldn't listen to me. So it's, obviously, Wall Street, the people who sold them these things are at fault then and during the financial crisis, but it's human nature that's at fault too. And I think that's what people after the fact fail to acknowledge.
All right. Well, I wanted to get to asking you about what you mentioned in terms of gamified trading, but I'm seeing a bunch of questions here in the chat that are too good to pass up. Okay. So, and some of them dovetail into some of the themes I wanted to cover. One of them from Twitter, Candace Rich is asking John Tamney, who's been on this show, is a friend of ours at the Atlas Society, wrote an article on short sellers being heroes. So that was back last year, I guess. She wants to know your thoughts. Is there anything moral or immoral right during the GameStop? Because you do talk a little bit about short sellers and the fact that this whole saga has really meant that few are going to be engaging in that the disincentives are so high, and that we might be seeing some more bubbles as a result. So maybe speak to that question.
Sure. I wouldn't call short sellers heroes, but short sellers have uncovered some big frauds and done a great service to retail investors. But there's no morality in buying something and buying a stock and hoping it'll go up. And there's no less morality in seeing it go down. But short sellers have long been vilified. As long as stock markets have existed, going back to the 1600s, there have been periodic bans on short selling. Short sellers have been arrested, clapped in irons, flogged, cast as sort of greedy devils. And it's just not true. Short selling is a legitimate practice that is very useful in markets, and the restrictions and the lack of short selling have actually hurt the little guy. So short sellers, look, there's two things that you personally can do as a typical investor, right? I don't recommend that that any retail investor go out and sell stock short, because it opens you up to theoretically unlimited losses. It's complicated, it's costly. You really should not do it unless you're financially sophisticated and kind of on Wall Street. You should leave it to the professionals, and I'll throw derivatives in there too, even if you think you understand them. But short sellers do a service to you, because you or I, there's two things we can do. We can see a stock and we can say, oh, I think that's a good stock, I'm going to buy it. Or you can say, oh, I don't think it's a good stock, I think it's too expensive or it's too risky, and I'm not going to buy it. So you can vote yes or you can abstain. You can't vote no. And short seller is voting no. So short seller brings needed balance to things, right? Because especially in a bubble, especially when things are very frothy, or there's something that's just kind of too good to be true, but too many people believe it, there needs to be a counterbalance. So somebody says, I'm calling BS on that. And I happen to be a person who has to do very careful research, because I'm opening myself up to unlimited losses, and I'm going to bet against this stock. And short sellers, more than people who are long, they are, first of all, they're going against a long-term trend. The stock markets over time rise, so they're kind of fighting history. But they're also, their money is expensive, and short selling is expensive. And so they need to sort of to blow the whistle. They can't just say, I'm passively betting short. A lot of them will be active short sellers. They'll sell a stock short, then they'll put their thesis out and say, I think that you should sell Enron because of whatever. But most things that people sell short are not Enron or Valiant or MCI WorldCom. Most things that people sell short are simply stocks that they feel are too expensive, not necessarily frauds. And most short selling happens not by dedicated short sellers, but happens people like Gabe Plotkin, who I write about in my book, the guy who lost $7 billion because he was short GameStop and other stocks that were affected. What they do is they have a pile of money, that's their fund. They find, let's say, two stocks that are pretty similar in the same business. Let's say Best Buy and GameStop. I don't know if he specifically did that trade. Best Buy, he might say that's a best of breed company in electronics and games and televisions. I like that company. I like where they're going. But not only am I going to buy Best Buy stock, I'm going to sell short GameStop stock. So I'm going to sell it and then get cash for selling it. And then I'm going to take some of that cash and I'm going to put more of it into Best Buy. And then if my thesis plays out, then I'm going to make more money than just having bet on Best Buy. And if the whole stock market goes down, it's going to, both of them will go down, but GameStop will go down more, and I'm going to sort of mitigate my losses. And that's the game they play. They don't take gigantic risks, but of course they never expect something to go up, 1,000%, right? That's not in their sort of range of possible outcomes. Maybe somebody will buy GameStop and it'll double one day, and they'll lose a lot of money. But no one's going to buy GameStop for 100 times what it was worth or 200 times what it was worth, which is what happened because of this concerted squeeze and attempted corner that happened. And so that blew up his fund, which is something that I guess he should have seen coming, and no tears for him. But but short selling has become very, very difficult because they've been targeted, because they're seen, not like, if hedge funds are public enemy number one, the short selling hedge funds are absolutely the top of that pyramid, the ultimate enemy. And to these young people, short selling, they sold short GameStop and AMC and things like that. Companies that did things that were very important to them as young people. I used to go to the movies all the time at AMC before the pandemic. I bought all my video games at GameStop. They're trying to destroy the company. And I just to point this out, and I can say this until I'm blue in the face and people are going to, keep on saying it, but selling a stock short is not destroying a company. It's betting that the stock will go down. If I think that a stock that's trading for $10 should really be trading for $5, and I make that bet, I'm not doing anything to destroy the company. I'm just betting that the stock price is too high. The stock changes hands all the time. And the stock trading at $5 is not going to destroy the company. It's just saying that this company is too expensive. at any given time, many stocks are too expensive, right? I mean, so it takes two to make a market, and short sellers are just making that market more efficient, providing liquidity. They're very useful to the system. They're not heroes, sorry, but I mean they are useful to the system, and they have uncovered a lot of frauds.
Okay, so Winnie, I hope we've answered your question about similarities between Wall Street bets and Occupy movement. Scott on YouTube has a couple of questions, and they are about GME. What about how short sellers sold short more GME than there were shares available?
Yes. So that is an also misunderstood point. I mean, the short sellers basically got over their skis because it's very, very unusual. So let me just go back and explain it. I don't want to give too long of an answer, but 2020 was possibly the worst ever year for short sellers. All kinds of shiny, dumb investments, like companies that said that they had a hydrogen-powered garbage truck that would go 1,000 miles on whatever, like all these wacky things. When even though they looked ridiculous, short sellers would bet against them, and then they would keep on going up because you had all these new investors piling into the market using their gamified trading accounts. And so things went up and up and up, and short sellers had an awful year. And the things that they felt safe betting against were the so-called meme stocks like GameStop, but their bets became excessive. So there's a free float in any stock. Those are the shares available to purchase. And in GameStop specifically, and this is very unusual, their bets against GameStop exceeded the shares that were available to trade. And that is possible through a process called rehypothecation, where you, without getting too wonky, I locate a borrow for a stock. I'm a short seller, and I sell the stock short. Now, I sold the stock to you. You don't know where the stock came from. All you know is that you bought the stock. Then your broker says, oh yeah, here's some GameStop stock. It's available to lend out, not knowing that it was already borrowed once, and they will lend it out again. So it is possible and not illegal for more than 100% of a stock to be sold short, although it shouldn't be. But it can happen because of a lack of communication between back office. There's, of course, a conspiracy theory that there are phantom shares and even more shares sold short than exist on a regular basis through a process called naked short selling, which has become much more difficult since short selling regulations were changed more than a decade ago. In this specific case, more than 100% of the shares available to purchase were sold short, which is like a powder keg. It's like leaving like a bunch of dynamite out with like dry kindling and nitroglycerin on top of it and whatever. You were just asking for an accident to happen. And these funds felt safe doing that, and they shouldn't have. And that should have been a sign to these financially sophisticated buyers that they were opening themselves up to a gigantic loss. And it's so their fault, for doing it, but they also were ambushed.
Okay, on Instagram, zooming out a little bit, a lot of our audience is our young people and students. Margot on Instagram asks, with inflation, how are young people supposed to get ahead, especially with investing being such a beast to try and get into?
Well, inflation is, they call it the cruelest tax for a reason. And inflation is not good for really anyone financially, except perhaps if you're a very big borrower. Let's say, there are people my age who have a lot of debt and not a lot of assets, not a lot of fixed income assets. Let's say you took out a mortgage at 2.8% and you have this big mortgage. Well, inflation at 8% is pretty good for you. You're one of the few people who actually benefit from high inflation. But if you're in your 20s, it's unlikely that you own a home. It's unlikely that you have this big fixed rate type loan. And so inflation does make it harder to get ahead. But the people who are most specifically hurt by inflation are not young people, but are older people who have been more prudent, who have a lot of savings and don't have a lot of debts anymore. So people who have been frugal. I'm thinking of people like my parents' generation, especially, who are living on a fixed income, who have an annuity or have very conservative investments that pay them an income. They're better off if they have dividend paying stocks, worse off if they have a lot of bonds, where inflation is basically corroding the value. If you're young, it is harmful to have inflation, but you're in your prime working years. You're the most desirable part of the workforce. People are, the labor market is still very tight. So you're at least able to not that it's a good thing, but you're at least able to partially counteract inflation. And the type of investments that you have should be skewed very much towards the types of investments that are the most shielded during inflation, which are stocks. Stocks are a natural inflation hedge to some extent, because companies, a business has debts that are whittled away by inflation. A company has hard assets like land and buildings that will become more valuable with inflation, and a company has sales that will be artificially boosted by inflation. So equities don't tend to do great during a period of inflation, but they are an inflation hedge. So young people are not the most disadvantaged generation when it comes to inflation. It's older people who are the worst off. But of course, it's not good for the economy or society overall, for sure.
As we are seeing. So speaking of young people, this Robinhood app, we were talking about the gamification of trading, and it seems like on the positive side, it was an easy entry for young people, small investors who are potentially just becoming savvy about the market for the first time, but also it seemed to almost invite, or at least that was the accusation, that it would invite compulsive trading, similar to compulsive gambling. And from an entrepreneurial perspective, the inception of Robinhood is fascinating. So perhaps share a bit about how the app got off the ground and the role it played in the saga.
Sure. So, I mean, if you just go back in time a bit, I mean, buying stocks used to be very expensive. So there was a minority of the population that had the wealth to be able to buy stocks, and buying stocks, transacting in the stock market, owning an investment fund, even reinvesting your dividends used to cost a lot of money. Wall Street took its toll every time you did anything in the market. And over time, but especially since the late 1970s, that cost has gradually come down. But what happened, and Robinhood was not the first to do this, but they were the first to do it successfully. They launched a free trading app where they said, you know what, there's these two guys, Vlad Tenev and Baju Bhatt, who had worked for hedge funds, by the way. They had set up a business to allow hedge funds to trade more smoothly. They said, you know what, these hedge funds pay basically nothing to trade. People could do this too. It's not free, but it's very close to free. And we could do this for people. And of course, nothing is free, but we can basically recoup those costs, and we can have a business built around this. And so first they built an app, and they tested it with students at Stanford University. And they built a really beautiful app that had a long waiting list. They created a lot of buzz in social media, had 1 million people waiting to join it when it finally went live in 2015. And between 2015 and 2021, even though this is a pretty small broker, about half of all new brokerage accounts opened in America were opened through Robinhood because it was such a beautiful app. It was phone-based. It was basically like an app with a brokerage bolted onto it. Whereas everyone else, Fidelity, Schwab, they were a broker that paid some guys to design an app that worked pretty well. These guys made a very, very intuitive app that, and I don't believe it's a coincidence that in terms of the fonts and the colors and the animations that it uses, bears a striking resemblance to daily fantasy sports and betting apps on your phone. Very, very similar. Confetti goes off, intermittent rewards, prizes for referrals. They mainly grew not through advertising, but through giving you basically like a lottery ticket type thing for a referral. They said, oh, open an account, you get a free share of stock. What stock? Well, it could be a $2 stock, or it could be occasionally a $50 or even $100 stock. And so it's like a lottery ticket, because you could open you could basically put $20 into the Robinhood app, $20, which you couldn't do many years ago, and then get a $50 stock, right? So, you just got something that's worth 2.5 times as much as the money you put in instantly. That's pretty good. And then if you refer a friend, then you get another stock. and that person gets a stock. And so it grew through this referral network. And the way that it worked is they fronted you the money. They would front you up to $1,000. So let's say you're at to stereotype it, like you're at a frat party and somebody's like, dude, I've got this Robinhood app and I've been buying stock. You should do it too. And I get a free share of stock. And like, oh yeah, I was thinking about buying XYZ stock. Like, here, open it up. In a few minutes, you can have an account. You put in your information. And even before you transfer money from your bank account, there is money on the account that they will provide you. That was the default setting. They would provide you money to trade right away. So that dumb idea that you had at the frat party, you could act on immediately and start trading. And because it was free, and it's not really free, it uses a system of payments called payment for order flow, where market makers rebate money to the broker in order to execute the trade, because they make money, the broker makes money. That's how it's free. The more you trade, the more money they make. So the app was designed to make people very, very active, to basically, and it whether by design, and I'm not going, I can't get into their heads, and the founders of the app would not speak to me, and they were very cagey, and they kind of stonewalled me about lots of things, although they did speak with me, on basically to verify facts. But I do believe, and a lot of consumer advocates do believe, that the app is designed deliberately to make people hyperactive. And I know for a fact that hyperactivity is inversely correlated with financial success. So it's designed in a way that correlates with failure to make money, or failure to make as much money as you should. There are many, many studies that document how often you look at your brokerage account and how often you trade being inversely correlated with success. And they would never really tell me. They would tell me, like, they would give me information that was like not even a half of an answer in terms of how well their clients did. But I am willing to venture that their clients do quite poorly on average. And there's a lot of circumstantial evidence to support that contention, but I don't have absolute proof.
Interesting. Yeah. Sometimes I run across people and I'm like, well, what do you do for a living? And they say, I'm a day trader. And to me, that always means no. You're doing something else.
Do not become a day trader. I mean, listen, there are people, you think that professional gambler is an oxymoron. And there is a very small subset of people who actually do make money gambling through using, not because they're lucky, but because they're smart, and they're basically not even interested in the outcome of the games. They're basically just sort of they're playing a numbers game, and there are occasional anomalies. The house doesn't always win. They're making a kind of scalping a small return, and I guess that is possible as a day trader, but the vast majority of people I've met who are day traders, it is not possible. More than 90% of people who describe themselves as day traders lose money, and probably high 90% fail to track a simple index fund, and they're much less tax efficient too. So I do not recommend day trading for anybody who's not a financial sophisticate, and even people who have, let's say, have left finance and become one. It's just, unless it's your hobby and you're taking very minimal risks and you really do understand what you're doing, I just don't really see the point in it. Because the beauty of the stock market is that you go to work during the day to do whatever you do to make a salary or run your business or do whatever. And then you have your savings, which is working for you day and night. Why mess with that? If you just invest passively, it's not a very satisfying answer to people, because everyone wants to beat the market. But I can tell you that statistically, if you pay very little and do very little, so you have a kind of a passive, low-cost, long-term, tax-efficient investing approach, you will beat 85% of individual investors. You'll be doing better than 85% of your neighbors, and you won't get rich overnight for sure, and you won't have anything to brag about, when the stock market, when the Dow's up 600 points one day or whatever, because you're just kind of along for the ride, and you're along for the ride when it's down 1,000 points one day. But over time, your compounded gains will be vastly superior to people who day trade.
So you talked about this young crowd who villainize the hedge fund managers, and even and greater object of their ire being short sellers, but that Elon Musk and Chamath Palihapitiya were entrepreneurs that they idolized. So tell us about how those two people got involved in becoming GameStop boosters, if you will.
I think that social media plays a big role, and I do describe that a lot of the book. And I have to say that I've been a student of manias and panics and crashes and kind of human good and poor decision making and investing for a long time. And there's history does rhyme, but I learned a lot in writing this book, because there's a whole aspect of it that I had not appreciated, which is the nature of influence, the nature of social influence. And so I spoke with social psychologists and social media experts and people who are experts in kind of influencer marketing and things like that. And the reasons that people get into the influence game are manifold. Some people do it for financial rewards, and there are lots of people you will find on TikTok and YouTube and whatever who promise to make you money in crypto or picking stocks or whatever, and are 100% self-serving when they do it, or let's say 99%. There will be exceptions, but there are people who do it for the psychic rewards. They like to be liked. They like to be followed. It gives them pleasure to be followed, to get attention. They just want attention. Attention is the currency of social media. And I think for Elon Musk, who, as we're recording this episode, I think is still the richest man on earth. He didn't need to make extra money, but he loves to egg people on. And he dropped a sort of a bomb in the middle of this episode. He kind of showed up when things were cooling off, when the mania was just starting to come off the boil, and he kicked it up another few degrees with one tweet, because he likes to be a hero to young people. I have 3 sons, 3 young men, and their age cohort thinks Elon Musk is pretty cool, and everything he says is pretty interesting, even when he doesn't know what he's talking about. So, and Chamath, I think, was possibly more self-serving. He personally participated in it, and then said he gave the money to profit. He went on social media and said, "Oh, I bought options on GameStop." He's like, "Oh, no, I'm giving it to charity." So another guy, Dave Portnoy, who was kind of definitely financially self-serving guy in social media, and also is a shareholder in a gambling app, and put himself. He's Davey Day Trader is how he was known. Had a couple of million followers on Twitter, and really fanned the flames. Although he did it financially, he was financially unsuccessful. He promised that he would hold AMC is another GameStop meme stock, that he would hold it until the end, until the bitter end, no matter what happened. And then 3 days later, he sold it at a loss of, I think, $700,000, if I recall correctly. So, it's just I don't totally understand the appeal, but it's these guys who never put on a tie, or very rarely have to put on a tie. They're in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is cool. Tech is cool. Social media is cool. Tesla's cool. Owning a sports team is cool. And, being in sports is cool. Being irreverent is cool. Using memes is cool. Using memes rather than, boring text to communicate. Memes are sort of, symbols that people use through social media, which is hence these became known as meme stocks, because that was the nature of much of the sort of the messages that were sent through Wall Street Bets and other social media forums, and so they were cool with the kids, and Wall Street was most uncool with the kids. So you had one player in here who wound up losing a lot of money, a hedge fund manager who went on, a guy my age, a year younger than me, Andrew Left, who was an active short seller, who was already hated by the Wall Street Bets crowd because he had successfully bet against a couple of stocks that were very hot on Wall Street Bets, kind of indirectly costing people money, I guess, who would bet on them. And he said, "You guys are suckers at the poker table, and you don't even know it. You don't know what you're talking about." And he got steamrolled. And it was like a delicious payback for these people. It wasn't even that they wanted to make money. They wanted him to lose money, which is getting back to this you
Definition
mentioned
of
the
envy.
kind of envy being such a dumb vice. I mean, it's I get it, but I really don't sympathize with it. I mean, it's such a sort of a weird thing to do with your money, is to weaponize it to make someone else lose more money than you lost. I mean, but that's but that it was a big part of this episode. And then
Pretty
a lot
irrational.
of these people were attacked outside of the financial sphere, attacked by having their social media accounts hacked, by having their children, people finding out their children's cell phone numbers and sending menacing messages to them, or racist and bigoted messages to them. So a lot of crazy stuff. Before I wrote this book, my sons who were on this forum were like, "Dad, you need to really harden your defenses." And
Ugh.
so I took all kinds of social media precautions. I haven't been hacked or anything like that, although I've received lots of insults, which was fine. I'm a financial journalist. I'm used to that. But nothing, no one hacked my bank account for social media yet, fingers crossed. And I had a whole social media audit, and also paid out of my own pocket for services to better protect myself, from any kind of nefarious online activity.
Good. All right, we have 4 minutes and many more questions than we can possibly get to, but I wanted to, we're not going to be able to answer what is a gamma squeeze in a couple of minutes, but I did want to get to this one by Jamie on TV, on Instagram, asking thoughts on insider trading. Is it more conspiratorial, or is there truth to politicians selling stocks before big crashes? That's something I think a lot of people are asking about, particularly with what happened during the lockdowns, and a lot of politicians having privy to inside information and making financial decisions, and offloading their stocks onto people who didn't have that same kind of information.
Okay, I'll try to answer quickly. I'm a columnist, not a reporter. I can inject my own opinion here, and that's something that I have written about. I think it's absolutely unacceptable for people who, I mean, it's just like knowing your company's about to have a profit warning and being an executive, and you'll go to jail if you tell your buddies at the golf course to sell all their stock. I think the same exact ethos should apply to politicians who have knowledge about, they go out and they say, "Oh yeah, everything's fine, don't worry, the pandemic's under control," and they go and buy a bunch of stock in Gilead, which is making the one drug that might be able to treat COVID, or dumping all of their stocks when they're out telling people everything's going to be fine, and they have this inside knowledge, or anything like that. And it's been shown that politicians are some of the best investors out there, and it's not because they're so smart. It's because as a group, they're privy to information that is useful to investors. It absolutely should not be allowed. And it's not just a matter of their gain is someone else's loss, because investing is a zero-sum game. So they're kind of stealing money really from other investors in an indirect way, but also because it erodes trust in Washington, it erodes trust in the integrity of markets. And the rules are really toothless currently. I believe that that anyone, and not just people in Congress, but also kind of high-level bureaucrats and their families, it's not a big sacrifice to have to own index funds. You know what? If you own index funds, you'll do better than most investors who try to actively trade stocks. There is no reason to own individual stocks. Let's say you own a bunch of individual stocks before you go into public office. Fine, put it in a blind trust. That's okay, right? I mean, you just don't know if you own it or don't own it. But you absolutely should not be allowed to trade, and even to have the appearance of impropriety. I'm an editor at the Wall Street Journal. I don't own any stocks, and it's not including things that I would never write about, because it just, someone could always come back and say, well, how did you know how to do that? And it seems like you made a lot of money. Maybe you knew something. So it just don't even go there. There's no reason today to have to own individual stocks or to trade them actively, and there's no excuse for them not to do that.
I couldn't agree more. And thank you, Spencer, for this hour that you've given us. And I want to, if we can put his Twitter handle in all of the chats, it's at Spencer Jakab on Twitter. Are you on Reddit?
I'm Spencer Jakab on Reddit. I don't use a pseudonym, but yeah, I'm not. You can't follow me on Reddit. You can only follow me.
Great.
But yeah, Spencer Jakab, Jakab is the spelling of my surname. Yeah, and I'm on and there's an author page out there somewhere. But yeah, Twitter is the best place to follow me. And I still write occasionally. I mostly edit. But yeah, updates about the book and other things I think about. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a great discussion and great questions.
Absolutely. And a great, great book. I highly recommend everyone go out and buy it and listen to it also on Audible. Really terrific narrator that Spencer got. So we thoroughly enjoyed it and we learned a lot. And I want to thank all of you who joined and asked such excellent questions. If you enjoy our interviews and the content that we publish, including a lot of memes at the Atlas Society, please consider making a tax-deductible donation to support our work. And I'm going to be on in 30 minutes on Clubhouse with our senior scholar, Professor Stephen Hicks, for an Ask Me Anything. So go take a bio break, get some coffee, and I'll see you there. Thank you, Spencer.
Thank you.